In the chaotic symphony of war, there is one sound that terrifies a tanker more than the whistle of an incoming mortar. Or the scream of a dive bomber. It isn't a loud noise. In fact, it is the absence of noise. It is the sudden sputtering cough of a 30-war machine choking on air. When a Sherman tank runs out of fuel, it dies instantly. The hydraulic turret stops turning, the radio crackles into static, the heater fails. In the blink of an eye, a Predator made of American steel becomes a stationary coffin, sitting helpless in the mud, waiting for an armor-piercing shell to end the misery. We call this the dry death. And in the late summer of 1944, as the Third Army raced across France, the dry death was killing more tanks than the Germans were. General was pushing his armored divisions harder than any force in history. He was devouring the map mile by bloody mile. But speed has a price. A single armored division drinks 60,000 gallons of gasoline a day, and the supply lines, the veins carrying the lifeblood of the army, were stretched until they snapped. At the forward logistics base near the Belgian border, the war had grown to a halt, not because of enemy fire but because of mud, thick, viscous, relentless European mud. It swallowed boots, it swallowed tires, and it was currently swallowing the hope of the entire offensive. Inside the command tent, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of wet wool. Captain Arthur Sterling stood behind his desk, looking like he had just stepped out of a recruitment poster. His uniform was pressed, his collar starched, and his fingernails were impossibly clean. He was a man of ledgers and regulations, bureaucrat who fought the war with a fountain pen. Standing opposite him was a tank commander from the front, covered in grime, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "Captain Sterling, you don't understand," the tanker pleaded, his voice raspy. "My platoon is stuck 3 miles past the ridge. We are sitting ducks. If we don't get juice by nightfall, we are going to have to spike the guns and abandon the tanks." Sterling didn't look up from his paperwork. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced by the messy reality of combat. "Sergeant, I cannot change the laws of physics," Sterling said, his voice clipped and nasal. "Look outside. The main supply route is a swamp. My heavy transport trucks, the GMC Deuce and a halves, weigh over 10 tons when loaded. If I send them out on those washed-out cow paths, they will sink to their axles. Then I lose the fuel in the trucks, so we just die." The tanker slammed his fist on the desk. "Is that your protocol, Captain?" "My protocol," Sterling said, finally looking up with cold, bureaucratic eyes, "is to preserve Army assets. I will not authorize a convoy until the engineers stabilize the road. That is final." Dismissed. The tanker stared at him for a long moment, vibrating with rage, before turning and storming out into the rain. Sterling brushed a speck of invisible dust from his sleeve and returned to his inventory lists. He felt secure. He was following the book, and in Captain Sterling's world, the book was never wrong. But outside, leaning against the corrugated metal wall of the maintenance shed, someone else had heard every word. Technical Sergeant Jack lit a cigarette, shielding the flame with cupped hands that were permanently stained with grease. Jack was 40 years old, a Detroit native who had spent 20 years on the assembly lines of the Ford Rouge plant before Uncle Sam handed him a rifle. He wasn't a soldier by nature, he was a mechanic. He spoke the language of pistons and gears better than he spoke English. Jack took a long drag, the smoke mixing with the cold rain. He watched the dejected tanker walk away, and then he looked at the row of massive GMC trucks down in the staging area. Sterling was a coward, but he was right about one thing. The trucks were too heavy. They were dinosaurs trapped in the tar pit. "He's going to let him die, ain't he, Jack?" The voice came from beside him. It was Private Tommy Miller, the kid, 19 years old, fresh from a cornfield in Kansas. With a face that hadn't yet learned how to hide fear, Tommy worshipped Jack, following him around like a lost puppy. Jack grunted, exhaling smoke, cares more about his promotion than he does about the boys on the line. "He's waiting for perfect conditions, but war ain't perfect, kid. So what do we do?" Tommy asked, shivering in his oversized jacket. Jack didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battered photograph. It was the only thing in the world he kept clean. A little girl with a missing front tooth smiled back at him. Lily, his daughter. She was back in Detroit, probably sleeping right now. Every time Jack fixed an engine, every time he tightened a bolt, he did it so he could get one day closer to seeing her again. If the tank stopped, the war stopped. If the war stopped, Jack didn't go home. "We don't wait," Jack said. Quietly, he tucked the photo back over his heart. "We improvise." Jack pushed off the wall and walked into the rain. He bypassed the massive, stuck GMC trucks. He walked past the sleek Jeeps that were too small to carry a payload. He stopped in front of a vehicle that nobody else was looking at. It was a Ford G8T. It looked pathetic compared to The other wore machines. It was a 1.5-ton commercial truck, essentially a farm vehicle painted olive drab. It had a flat, ugly face, narrow tires, and a wooden cargo bed. It was designed to haul potatoes, not high-octane gasoline. It had no armor. A stray bullet would punch through its door like it was wet cardboard, but Jack saw what the others didn't. "What are you looking at that heap for?" Tommy asked, splashing up beside him. "That's the laundry truck." "It's light," Jack murmured, kicking the tire. "It weighs half as much as a GMC. It has a 6-cylinder engine that doesn't know when to quit. It won't sink, kid. It'll skate right over the mud." "But it's a cargo truck, Jack," Tommy argued. "It doesn't have a tank. It doesn't have a pump. You can't just throw gas cans in the back. It'll take hours to fill a Sherman by hand. They'll be dead by then." Jack turned to Tommy and a grin slowly spread across his oil-stained face. It wasn't a nice grin. It was the grin of a man who was about to break every rule in the manual. Who said anything about filling them by hand? Jack said, "Go get the welding torch and find me 4 55-gallon drums. We're going to do a little surgery. Sterling will have our hides," Tommy whispered, eyes wide. "If we damage Army property, let me worry about Sterling," Jack growled. He walked to the front of the Ford G8T and patted the hood. The metal was cold, but the potential underneath was hot. "Army wants a solution. We're going to build them one. We're going to turn this grocery getter into a rolling bomb." "You're crazy, Jack," Tommy said, but he was already moving toward the tool shed. "Yeah," Jack muttered to himself, listening to the distant rumble of artillery fire. "Maybe, but crazy is the only thing that works out here." Jack opened the door of the Ford. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the thin steering wheel. He could smell the stale tobacco and old canvas. It wasn't a tank, it wasn't a hero's chariot, it was just a truck. But tonight it was going to be a lifeline. Jack turned the key. The engine hesitated, then caught with a steady, rhythmic purr. It was the heartbeat of American industry, waking up to do the job the generals couldn't figure out. The dry death was waiting, but Jack was coming. Part 2. The Frankenstein of France. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. That is a lie in war. Desperation is the mother, and she is a cruel, unforgiving parent. Most military innovations are developed by teams of scientists in white coats working in sterile laboratories in Washington or London. They have blueprints, slide rules, and unlimited budgets. But the machine that was about to save the Third Army wasn't born in a lab. It was born in a graveyard of broken steel under the freezing rain, built by 2 men who were breaking every single rule in the United States Army Handbook. The sun had vanished behind a curtain of gray, leaving the depot in a premature twilight. Inside the maintenance shed, the air was alive with the violent screech of tearing wood and the groaning of metal. Jack was not gently disassembling the Ford G8T, he was butchering it. "Pull, kid, put your back into it," Jack roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated tin roof. Private Tommy Miller gritted his teeth, his boots slipping in the oil mud as he yanked on the crowbar. With a sickening crack, the wooden side panel of the Ford's cargo bed splintered and came free. Tommy stumbled back, panting, clutching the jagged wood like a weapon. "We are destroying a perfectly good truck, Jack," Tommy said, wiping sweat mixed with grime from his forehead. "Captain Sterling is going to have us peeling potatoes until 1950. This truck wasn't perfectly good," Jack muttered, tossing a piece of scrap metal onto a pile. "It was useless. It was a glorified wheelbarrow. Now hand me the torch." Ford G8 now looked like a skeleton. Its cargo bed was gone, exposing the naked chassis rails. It looked fragile, almost skeletal, like a starved animal. It certainly didn't look like something that could carry 1,000 gallons of volatile fuel into a firefight. Jack pulled his welding goggles down over his eyes. He looked like a demonic insect. He lit the acetylene torch, the blue flame hissing with lethal heat. "The problem," Jack shouted over the hiss of the torch, "is that we don't have a tanker barrel, so we make one." He pointed to the corner of the shed. There, arranged in a line, were 4 55-gall steel drums. They were standard issue, dented and rusted. Jack didn't just want to load them onto the truck, he wanted to fuse them. He began to cut and weld, joining the drums together into a single continuous reservoir. Sparks cascaded around him like a fountain of molten gold. The smell of ozone and burning paint filled the shed. It was dangerous work. If even one of those drums had a lingering pocket of fumes, the heat would turn the shed into a crater. But Jack worked with the steady surgical precision of a man who had spent 20 years on the Detroit assembly line. He wasn't just welding, he was stitching metal. Tommy watched in awe. He had seen Jack change spark plugs and fix flat tires. He had never seen this. This was alchemy, but a reservoir was useless without a way to get the gas out. Gravity was too slow, they needed pressure. "The pump?" Tommy asked, shouting to be heard. "How do we get the gas into the Shermans? We can't use a hand crank." Jack flipped his goggles. Up his eyes bright in the gloom, he pointed a greased finger at the Ford's transmission. The G8 has a power takeoff unit. It's supposed to run a winch or a thresher. We're going to reroute it. Jack crawled under the truck. He dragged a heavy cast iron water pump scavenged from a broken fire truck over the mud. He began to bolt it to the frame. A drive shaft from the transmission to the pump. It was ugly. It was a mechanical abomination, but if his math was right, the engine of the truck would power the pump, sucking fuel from the drums and blasting it out at 50. Gall a minute, he was tightening the final bolt when the shed doors banged open. A silhouette stood framed against the rainy night. It was sharp, angular, and vibrating with indignation. What in God's name is going on in here? The voice cut through the noise like a knife. Captain Arthur Sterling stepped into the light, his polished boots recoiling as they touched the oil-stained floor. He looked at the pile of splintered wood. He looked at the mutilated Ford truck. He looked at the unauthorized welding equipment. His face turned a shade of purple that was visible even in the dim light. Sterling screeched, "I gave a direct order to stand down. You are destroying government property. You are modifying a vehicle without authorization. Do you have any idea how many regulations you are violating right now?" Jack slowly slid out from under the chassis. He didn't stand up immediately. He sat on the floor, wiping his wrench with a rag, looking up at the captain with a calmness that was more insulting than any shout. "I stopped counting after 12. Sir," Jack said. "This is a court-martial offense," Sterling sputtered, waving his clipboard at the Frankenstein truck. "Look at this monstrosity. It's unsafe. It's a violation of safety protocols. I'm placing you under arrest." "Sergeant Miller, call the MPs." Tommy froze. He looked at the captain, terrified. The authority of the uniform was absolute, but Jack stood up. He towered over Sterling. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a force of nature covered in grease. "You can arrest me, Captain," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "You can throw me in the stockade. You can strip my stripes, but do you hear that?" Jack pointed a finger toward the east, toward the front lines. The distant rumble of artillery was constant, a low thunder that never stopped. "That is the sound of the 4th Armored Division getting pounded," Jack said. "There are 5 men in every one of those tanks. They are your men, Captain, and right now they are checking their watches and praying that someone in the rear gives a damn about them. You want to follow the book, fine, but the book doesn't bleed. They do." Sterling stared at him, his mouth opened then closed. He looked at the clipboard, his shield against the world. And for the first time it felt flimsy. "If that thing explodes," Sterling whispered, his voice trembling, "it will take out half the depot. Then I guess I better leave before that happens," Jack said. He turned his back on the officer. "Hand me the wrench, kid." Sterling stood there for a long, agonizing moment. The rain hammered on the roof. The choice was between his career and his conscience. Finally, without saying a word, the captain turned on his heel and marched out into the night. He didn't call the MPs, but he didn't give permission either. He simply washed his hands of the disaster to come. "He's going to hang us if we make it back," Tommy whispered, his hands shaking as he passed the tool. "If we make it back, kid," Jack grinned. "I'll let him try." They worked through the night. They reinforced the sagging suspension of the Ford with leaf springs cut from a destroyed Jeep. The poor G8T groaned under the weight of the steel drums. It sat low, its belly scraping the mud. It was an ugly, lopsided beast. A rolling coffin. Jack finished the final connection on the hose. He walked to the cab and taped the photo of Lily to the dashboard. Her smile was the only bright thing in the entire truck. "Why?" Tommy asked quietly, looking at the picture. "Why stick your neck out for guys you don't even know?" Jack looked at the photo. He touched the little girl's face. "Because her generation shouldn't have to fight this war, Tommy," Jack said softly. "We finish it here. We finish it now, even if we have to drive a bomb to do it." Jack climbed into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The Ford engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The pump whirred, a high-pitched mechanical scream. It was alive. Jack looked at Tommy. "Load up, kid. The gas station is open for business." As the modified Ford G8 lurched out of the shed and into the rain, it didn't look like a hero. It looked like a disaster waiting to happen. But as Jack shifted gears and pointed the nose toward the sound of the guns, the little truck seemed to growl. It was ready to feed the beasts or die trying. You can survive a bullet if you are lucky. You can survive shrapnel if you are tough, but there is one thing on a battlefield that you cannot survive, no matter how brave you are: physics. Physics does not care about your rank. It does not care about your courage. And right now, physics was trying to kill Private Tommy Miller. The modified Ford G8 was screaming down a muddy logging road, the rain lashing against the cracked windshield. They were 5 miles out from the depot on a shakedown run to test the new pumping system. Tommy was behind the wheel, his knuckles white. He was driving the way he drove the farm truck back in Kansas, fast, loose, and Confident, he saw the crater too late. "Brake!" Jack yelled from the passenger seat. Tommy panicked. He slammed his boot onto the brake pedal, locking the wheels. On a normal truck with a load of potatoes or ammunition, the vehicle would have skidded to a halt, but this was not a normal truck. Behind the cab, inside the welded steel drums, 400 gallons of gasoline did what liquid always does when momentum shifts. It rushed forward. It is called the free surface effect. It is the invisible killer of tankers. As the truck slowed, the massive weight of the fuel slammed into the front of the tank like a tidal wave. The force lifted the rear tires off the ground. The Ford G8 didn't stop. It lunged. It became a sled, sliding uncontrollably toward a massive oak tree. "Let off the brake!" Jack roared, grabbing the steering wheel with one hand. Tommy was frozen in terror, his foot glued to the floor. Jack didn't hesitate. He jammed his elbow into Tommy's ribs, knocking the kid's foot off the pedal. Jack wrenched the wheel hard to the left. The truck fishtailed violently, the fuel back slamming into the rear of the tank with a metallic clang that sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. The suspension groaned, the leaf springs flattening out completely. The truck teetered on two wheels, balancing on the edge of disaster before crashing back down onto the mud mere inches from the tree bark. Silence returned to the cab, broken only by the heavy breathing of two men who had just seen their own graves. Tommy was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. I hit the brakes, Jack, I hit them hard. That's why we almost died," Jack said, his voice surprisingly calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his tobacco pouch, his hands steady. "Listen to me, kid, you are used to hauling crates. Crates stay where you put them, but liquid—" Jack lit a match, the flare illuminating the fear in Tommy's eyes. "Liquid is alive. Ghost in the back of the truck. When you move, it waits. When you stop, it punches you in the back of the head. You can't fight it." Jack exhaled a cloud of blue smoke. "You have to dance with it." "Dance," Tommy squeaked. "You drive smooth," Jack instructed, gesturing with the cigarette. "You brake early, you turn wide, you anticipate the wave. You have to feel the weight shifting before it actually shifts. If you fight the liquid wins, and if the liquid wins, we explode. Do you understand?" Tommy nodded slowly, wiping sweat from his eyes. "I think so." "Good," Jack said. "Now get out, I'm driving. We have a stop to make before we hit the line." Half an hour later, the Ford G8 rolled into the forward medical station. It was a place of misery, a collection of tents set up in a muddy field where the wounded from the armored division were being patched up before transport to the rear. The air smelled of antiseptic, wet earth, and old blood. Jack killed the engine. The truck sat low and heavy, the welded tank looking ominous in the moonlight. He hopped out, his boots. "Stay with the truck, kid," Jack ordered. "Guard that pump with your life. If anyone smokes near it, shoot them." Jack walked toward the main medical tent. The flap opened and a woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a stained apron. It was Sarah. She was 35, with tired eyes that had seen too much of the inside of men's bodies. She wasn't beautiful in the way movie stars were beautiful. She was beautiful because she was the only soft thing in a world of hard edges. She saw Jack approaching and her expression shifted from exhaustion to a sharp, painful recognition. "I heard a rumor," Sarah said, her voice husky. "Some mechanic was building a bomb on wheels. I should have known it was you, Jack." "It's not a bomb, Sarah," Jack said, trying to smile. "It's a gas station." "It's a coffin," she corrected, walking over to him. She looked at the truck, then back at him. "Where are you going?" "The 4th Armored is pinned down at the Falaise Gap. They're dry. If I don't get this fuel to them, they're finished." Sarah looked down at his grease-stained hands. She knew better than to argue. She had patched up enough soldiers to know the difference between men who followed orders and men who followed a calling. Jack was the latter. "You need supplies," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. "I have a wrench and a prayer," Jack shrugged. Sarah shook her head. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small metal tin. She pressed it into Jack's hand. "Morphine, sulfa powder, and clean bandages," she whispered. "If you get hit, if that fuel goes up, these won't help. But if you survive the crash, maybe they will." Jack closed his fingers around the cold metal tin. He looked at Sarah. "In another life, maybe they could have gone for coffee, maybe they could have gone dancing. But in this life, all they had was a muddy field and a transfer of medical supplies." "How is she?" Sarah asked softly, nodding toward the truck, where she knew the picture of Lily was taped. "She's 7, Jack said, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm doing this so she stays 7, so she grows up in a world where we won." Sarah reached out and touched his arm. Her grip was strong. "Then don't be a hero, Jack. Heroes get medals on their graves. Be a father. Fathers come home." She held his gaze for a second longer, an entire unspoken conversation passing between them before she pulled her hand away and stepped back into the shadows of the medical tent. Jack stood there for a moment, the tin burning a hole in His palm, he felt the weight of the promise. Father's come home. He turned and walked back to the truck. Tommy was waiting, looking nervously at the dark forest line. Who was that? Tommy asked as Jack climbed in. That was our conscience, Jack muttered, putting the morphine tin in his breast pocket right next to Lily's photo. Suddenly the radio receiver Jack had salvaged and bolted to the dashboard crackled to life. It was a burst of static, followed by a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Big Mama to any station. Big Mama to any station. We are down to 5 rounds. Fuel is 0. Krauts are moving in on the flank. This is Sergeant. We are signing off. God help us. The signal died. Tommy looked at Jack, his eyes wide with panic. That's them. That's the tank unit. Jack gripped the steering wheel. He felt the vibration of the engine, the sloshing of the fuel. Behind him, the medical tin in his pocket and the fear in his gut. They aren't signing off yet, Jack growled. Shifting the Ford into gear, the gears ground together with a violent crunch. Hold on, kid, Jack said, his eyes locking onto the dark road ahead. We're done practicing, now we dance for real. The Ford G8 surged forward, no longer clumsy truck but a desperate arrow aimed straight at the heart of the war. Physics was still trying to kill them. But Jack had decided that tonight he was going to drive faster than the laws of nature allowed. Most dangerous enemy in a war isn't always the one holding a German Luger. Sometimes it's the man standing on your own side of the barbed wire holding a clipboard. Jack shifted the Ford GAT into second gear, the engine whining as they approached the perimeter gate of the depot. The rain had turned into a fine icy mist that clung to the windshield. Beside him, Tommy was gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles looked like polished marble. We're almost out, Tommy whispered just past the sentry, and we're ghosts. But as the truck rounded the final bend toward the exit, the world exploded into blinding white light. Damn it, Jack hissed, shielding his eyes. 2 jeeps blocked his road, their high beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Standing between them, flanked by 2 military police officers with guns, was Captain Arthur Sterling. He wasn't there to wave them goodbye. Jack slammed on the brakes. The fuel in the back sloshed violently, thud splash, shoving the truck forward a few extra feet before it shuddered to a halt. The front bumper stopped inches from Sterling's knees. The captain didn't flinch, he looked triumphant. Turn off the engine, Sergeant Sterling shouted, his voice cracking with authority. Step out of the vehicle with your hands behind your head. He called the MPs. Tommy stammered, panic rising in his throat. Jack, he's going to arrest us. He's really going to do it. Jack stared through the rain-streaked glass. He saw the MPs raising their weapons. They were American kids just like Tommy, following orders given by an officer who had never seen combat. Stay in the truck, kid, Jack said quietly. Jack opened the door and stepped out into the mud. He didn't raise his hands. He walked to the front of the truck, the headlights illuminating his grease-stained uniform. He looked like a wreck, but he stood like a statue. Move the jeeps, Captain, Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I have men dying 5 miles from here. You have nothing, Sterling spat, stepping forward. You are stealing government property. You are disobeying a direct order. I'm shutting this unauthorized circus down before you blow up half of France. Sterling turned to the MPs. Him, and if the private in the truck moves, shoot the tires. One of the MPs leveled his at the front tire of the Ford. I wouldn't do that, son, Jack said. He didn't look at the MP. He kept his eyes locked on Sterling. Do it, Sterling screamed. Captain, do you know what high-test aviation fuel does when it meets a tracer bullet? Jack asked. He took a slow step forward. We aren't hauling potatoes. There are 400 gallons of volatile gasoline in those drums. The fumes alone are leaking out of my bad welds. Jack pointed at the MP's gun. You shoot that tire, the spark hits the fumes. We don't just get a flat. This truck becomes a thermobaric bomb. It takes out me, the kid, the jeeps, and you, Captain. You'll be nothing but a shadow burned onto the mud. The MP froze. He lowered the barrel of his gun slightly, looking from the truck to the captain. The physics of the situation dawned on him. Sterling's face went pale. He realized he wasn't standing in front of a subordinate. He was standing in front of a trigger. You're bluffing, Sterling whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Jack reached into his pocket. For a second, the MP's tensed, fingers tightening on triggers, but Jack didn't pull out weapon. He pulled out his Zippo lighter. He flipped the lid open with a metallic clink. He spun the flint. The flame flared up, dancing in the wind, inches from the open window of the truck cab where the smell of gasoline was thickest. Do the math, Captain, Jack said, cold as ice. Get out of my way or we all go to hell together right now. It was a standoff between a man who feared for his career and a man who had already accepted his own death. Sterling looked into Jack's eyes and saw absolutely nothing there but iron resolve. He realized that Jack was more dangerous than the Germans. Sterling swallowed hard, the rain dripped off the rim of his helmet. He looked at the lighter, then at the terrified MPs. "Let them pass, Sterling, sir," the MP asked, confused. "I said let them pass," Sterling shrieked, his voice breaking. "Move the damn jeeps." The MP scrambled, engines roared as the blockade parted. Jack snapped the lighter shut, the flame vanished. He walked back to the driver side, climbed in, and slammed the door. "You were going to blow us up?" Tommy asked, his voice barely a squeak. "No," Jack said, putting the truck in gear. "I knew Sterling was too much of a coward to die for a regulation." Jack stomped on the gas. The Ford G8 lurched forward, passing the pale-faced captain. As they passed, Jack didn't salute. He didn't even look, he just drove into the dark. 5 minutes later, the depot was gone. The lights were gone. The rules were gone. They were in the void. The terrifying expanse of no man's land between the supply lines and the front. "Kill the headlights," Jack ordered. "But we can't see," Tommy protested. "If we can see, they can see," Jack said. "Switch to cat eyes." Tommy flipped the switch. The main headlights died, replaced by two tiny slits of light on the bumper. They cast a faint, eerie glow that illuminated only 10 of road ahead. The world shrank down to a tunnel of mud and rain. The atmosphere in the cab changed. The adrenaline of the confrontation faded, replaced by suffocating dread. The silence of the countryside was heavy. Jack reached under the dashboard and ripped the wire loose. The radio went dead. "Why did you do that?" Tommy asked. "So Sterling can't call us back," Jack said. "We are off the map now, kid. No orders, no backup, just us." They drove in silence for miles. The Ford Gat groaned and creaked, the suspension fighting the cratered road. Every bump sent a wave of liquid slamming against the back of the cab, a constant reminder of the bomb they were riding. Then they saw it. On the horizon, the sky wasn't black. It was flickering. Bursts of orange and white light flashed silently in the distance, followed seconds later by the dull thump, thump, thump of heavy ordnance. "Fireworks," Tommy whispered. "That's the Falaise pocket," Jack said, his grip tightening on the wheel. "That's where the 4th Armored is dying." The road began to climb. They were entering the forest of the trees crowded the road, their branches looking like clawed hands. The dim light of the cat eyes. Suddenly, Jack slammed on the brakes. He didn't need to warn Tommy this time. He feathered the pedal, managing the slosh. The truck slid to a halt. "What?" Tommy asked. "Why did we stop?" "Listen," Jack said. Tommy strained his ears. He heard the rain, he heard the wind, and then he heard something else. A mechanical grinding sound, clanking, squeaking. It was coming from the darkness ahead. Is that us?" Tommy asked, hopeful. "Is that a Sherman?" Jack cracked his window. The sound grew louder. It was distinct, a high-pitched squeal of ungreased tracks, a guttural diesel growl. Jack's face went rigid. "Shermans have Ford V8 gas engines," Jack whispered. "That they roar." He looked at Tommy, and the look in his eyes was pure terror. "That sound, that's a diesel engine, and those tracks are overlapping. What does that mean?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling. "It means," Jack said, reaching for the gear shift to throw the truck into reverse, "that isn't the cavalry, kid. That's a German Panzer IV, and we just drove right down its throat." Before Jack could release the clutch, a beam of light cut through the forest darkness, landing squarely on the windshield of the Ford Gat. They had been found. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to do your job while your bladder is emptying itself, blinded by the spotlight of the Panzer IV. Jack didn't reverse. He didn't swerve. He froze. "Don't move," Jack hissed, his hand clamping down on Tommy's trembling knee. "Don't breathe. It's a tank, Jack," Tommy squeaked, staring into the white abyss. "It's going to turn us into pink mist. It's a predator, kid. Predators react to movement." The German tank sat there 30 yards away, its engine idling with a guttural metallic chug. The turret slowly rotated. The spotlight swept over the Ford G8. It lingered on the wooden rails, the wheels, the absurd stack of welded drums. For 5 agonizing seconds, the German commander hesitated. Why? Because in the logic of war, what he was seeing was impossible. American supply trucks traveled in convoys of 50. They were guarded by jeeps. They didn't drive alone at night, deep in enemy territory, looking like a heap of scrap metal. The German didn't see a threat. He saw a mistake. He saw a lost French farm truck or a pile of debris. "He's confused," Jack whispered. "He's thinking about it." Then the spotlight flicked away. The turret began to turn back toward the forest road, dismissing the Ford as unworthy of an 88 Michelle. "Now," Jack screamed. He didn't go backward. He stomped the gas pedal to the floor and threw the wheel hard to the right. The Ford G8 didn't retreat. It charged past the tank, diving into the dense underbrush of the forest. The German commander realized his mistake a second too late. The Panzers machine gun opened fire, a line of tracers tearing through the night air right where the Ford had been a heartbeat ago. "Go, go, go," Tommy yelled, holding onto the dashboard as the truck bounced violently over roots and rocks. "I'm Going, Jack wrestled the steering wheel, the suspension screamed in protest, the fuel in the back slammed. Against the cab, thud, 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 like a giant trying to kick the door down. Behind them, the Panzer began to turn. Crashing through the trees, crushing saplings like matchsticks, but the monster was heavy, the Ford was light. Jack drove like a madman, weaving through gaps in the trees that were too narrow for the tank. They broke through and skidded onto a dirt track ahead. The sky was glowing with the dying embers of a battle, and there they were, 3 M4 Sherman sat in a clearing arranged in a defensive triangle. They were silent, dark, motionless. "Are they dead?" Tommy whispered. "No," Jack said, spotting the movement of a hatch opening. "They're sleeping." Jack flashed his lights. 3 shorts, 1 long beat for victory. A figure popped out of the lead tank's turret. It was Sergeant. He looked like a coal miner, his face black with soot. He waved his arms frantically. "Get that thing in here," roared his voice, barely audible over the distant mortar fire. "We got Krauts moving up the ravine." Jack drifted the Ford G8 sideways, sliding into the mud right next to the rear engine deck of his tank. "Big Mama, kid, man the pump," Jack shouted, kicking his door open. Tommy scrambled out, slipping in the mud, and ran to the back of the truck. He engaged the PTO lever. The Ford's engine RPM dropped as the load kicked in. The homemade pump began to scream, a high-pitched mechanical whine that sounded like a blender crushing rocks. "It's too loud," Tommy yelled. "They'll hear us in Berlin. Let him hear." Jack grabbed the rubber hose. He scrambled up the slippery steel hull of the Sherman, met him in the fuel cap. "You crazy son of a, you actually came." "Service." Smile, Jack grunted, jamming the nozzle into the tank's intake. "Open the valve, kid." The pump shuddered. The hose stiffened as the dragon's blood rushed through it. Glug, glug, glug. It was the most beautiful sound the world, but the noise of the pump had a price. From the 100 yards away, muzzle flashes sparked in the dark. Ping, ping. Bullets began to slap against the armor of the Sherman. "Infantry!" yelled. "Drop." Inside the turret, "Jack, get down." "I can't," Jack yelled back. The nozzle didn't have a lock. The homemade fit was loose. If he let go, the pressure would spray gasoline all over the hot engine deck. "I have to hold it." Jack stood exposed on the back of the tank, a sitting duck. He hunched over the fuel cap, using his body to shield the connection. "Jack!" Tommy screamed from the ground. He grabbed his M1 rifle and started firing blindly into the trees. "Hurry up." Bullets whizzed past Jack's ear like angry hornets. One struck the fender of the Ford G8. Punching a hole, a stream of gas began to leak out onto the mud. "We're leaking," Tommy cried. "Keep pumping." Jack roared. He watched the fuel gauge on the pump. 50 gall. The German fire was getting accurate. A mortar round exploded 20 yards away, spraying mud and shrapnel. A piece of hot metal sliced across Jack's cheek. He didn't flinch. He just stared at the hose, willing the liquid to move faster. "Come on, Big Mama," Jack whispered, blood dripping down his face. "Drink up." Suddenly, a terrifying sound cut through the chaos. The distinct clank squeak of the Panzer IV. It had found them. It was breaking through its long barrel, lowering, aiming straight at the cluster of silent American tanks. "Tank!" Tommy screamed. "Jack, we have to go." "Not yet." Jack held the nozzle. The Sherman needed at least 100 gallons to maneuver. The Panzer stopped. It was taking aim. It was going to put a shell right through the Ford G8T and incinerate them all. "Sergeant!" Jack slammed his hand on the Sherman's turret. "She's wet. Start her up." Jack ripped the nozzle out, gas spraying over his uniform. He jumped off the tank, landing in the mud next to Tommy. "Run!" Jack grabbed Tommy and dragged him under the chassis of the Ford. For a second, nothing happened. The Panzer fired. Boom! The shell whistled over their heads, missing the low-profile Ford by inches, and exploded in the trees behind them. The German gunner had aimed too high in the dark. And then the ground shook. Vroom! The 500-horsepower Ford V8 engine of Big Mama roared to life. It coughed a massive cloud of black smoke and then settled into a thunderous idle. The turret of the Sherman whipped around with a hydraulic whine faster than the manual traverse of the German Panzer. "Target acquired," Kame's voice over the external speaker, sounding like the voice of God. Crack! The Sherman 76 mumbler gun fired. The muzzle flash lit up the clearing like noon. The shell slammed into the Panzer IV before it could reload. The German tank shuddered. And then its ammunition cooked off. A tower of flame shot into the sky, illuminating the battlefield. Jack lay in the mud, covered in gasoline, oil, and blood, his chest heaving. Next to him, Tommy was laughing hysterically. "We did it," Tommy choked out. "Jack, we did it." Jack looked up. The other 2 Shermans were starting their engines, now coughing to life as the crew from Big Mama tossed them cans filled from the G8. The beasts were awake. Jack slowly sat up, reaching for his pocket. He pulled out the tin Sarah had given him. It was dented. He pulled out the photo of Lily. It was dry. "Yeah, kid," Jack said, wiping the blood from his cheek and looking at the burning German. Tank, we opened the station, but now we got to get the hell out of the way. The dawn didn't break over France. It bled through the smoke. The Ford G8T limped back into the depot at 600 hours. It was a ruin on wheels. Windshield was shattered, the wooden rails were scorched black, the suspension was collapsed on the left side, and the homemade pump was leaking a trail of rainbow-colored fluid onto the wet gravel. It looked less like vehicle and more like a survivor of a fist fight with God. Jack killed the engine, the silence that followed was heavy, ringing in their ears after the chaos of the night. He looked at Tommy. The kid was asleep in the passenger seat, head against the glass, clutching his rifle like a teddy bear. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. Wake up, kid, Jack whispered. We're home. As they stepped out, the reception committee was waiting. Captain Arthur Sterling marched across the mud, flanked by 2 MPs. His face was a mask of vindictive triumph. He had his clipboard ready. Them, Sterling barked, pointing a manicured finger at Jack. Gross insubordination, theft of government property, endangerment of a unit. You are finished, Sergeant. I will see you in for the rest of your life. The MPs hesitated. They looked at the battered truck. They smelled the cordite and the raw gasoline. They saw the blood dried on Jack's cheek. I gave you an order, Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. Belay that order. The voice was low, calm, and carried the weight of absolute iron. A jeep pulled up behind Sterling. A man stepped out. He wore a leather bomber jacket and the silver eagles of a colonel. It was Bill Vance, the division commander. He walked with a limp, leaning on a cane, a souvenir from North Africa. Sterling snapped to attention, pale as a sheet. Colonel Vance, sir, I was just apprehending these men. They stole supply truck, and I know what they did, Captain. Vance interrupted, walking past Sterling as if he were invisible. Vance stopped in front of Jack. He looked at the grease-stained mechanic. He looked at the trembling private. Then he walked over to the Ford G8. He ran a gloved hand over the bullet hole in the fender. He touched the jagged, ugly welds. Fuel drums. I just got a radio call from Sergeant, Vance said softly. He says the 4th Armored is moving again. He says they pushed 5 miles past the gap this morning. He says they were saved by a madman in a milk truck. Vance turned to Sterling. Captain, do you know what this truck is? It's a safety violation, sir. Sterling stammered. No. Vance said, it's a victory. Dismiss the MPs, Captain, and go find these men some coffee before I strip you of your rank. Sterling wilted. He turned and walked away, his clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. The bureaucracy had lost to the reality of war. Vance looked at Jack. He didn't offer a salute. He offered something better. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a silver cigarette case, and offered it to the mechanic. Nice work, Vance said. Jack took a cigarette. His hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear but from the adrenaline leaving his body. Just doing the job, sir, Jack said. Get some sleep. Vance nodded. What? We move out in 3 hours. We're going to Berlin. As the colonel walked away, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The depot woke up. Engines roared to life. The great machine of the American Army was grinding forward again. Jack leaned against the warm grill of the Ford Gat. He smoked quietly, watching the convoy of massive tanks roll past. They were powerful armored beasts, the stars of the newsreels. No one looked at the little Ford truck dying in the mud. Years from now, historians would write about the generals. They would write about the strategy and the firepower. The Ford G8 would rust in a scrapyard. Forgotten, its metal would be recycled into soup cans or girders, but Jack knew the truth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo of Lily. He wiped a smudge of oil off her smiling face. We build monuments to the men who hold the guns, but we forget the men who carry the fuel. We forget the improvisers, the mechanics, the fathers who turn grocery trucks into lifeboats because they have a promise to keep. Jack looked at the photo one last time before tucking it away over his heart. We're coming home, Lily, he whispered to the wind. We're coming home. Engine of history is loud, fueled by fire and fury, but the heartbeat of survival that is quiet. It sounds like wrench turning in the dark, fixing a broken world. One bolted